Hey, I'm Jimmy, and this is Philosophy for Everyday Life. So, this is my fourth video on Stoicism and on whether Stoicism can serve as a guide for everyday philosophers. So far, I've talked about Stoicism's most powerful insight and about 3 reasons why I think Stoicism doesn't go far enough. In this video, I'd like to talk about why I think Stoicism and its particular problems are a fitting philosophy for the 1%. For the wealthiest and most powerful members of our society. To put it in slightly different terms, aside from the question of whether Stoicism is true, I want to talk about why it might be a useful ideology for a particular social and economic structure. If you're not familiar with the word ideology in the sense in which I'm using it, you might want to go back and take a look at my video called Why the Real World is an Ideology. So there are 2 reasons why I think Stoicism is going to be a way of thinking especially suited to the wealthy rather than to the poor. The first reason is that the wealthy have a stake in normalizing their wealth. It's to their advantage if everyone believes that wealth is generally acquired through hard work, that those who have wealth deserve to have wealth, and that those who don't have wealth deserve not to have it. Now, I'm not saying that all modern-day Stoics are wealthy, or that those who are have intentionally chosen Stoicism for this reason. That's not how an ideology works. Ideologies aren't about the specific beliefs of specific persons. They're about the social function of beliefs. How do beliefs work in society, almost like independent forces, separately from whoever happens to take them up and integrate them into their lives? When we ask about ideologies, this is what we're asking. So here's the first reason I think that Stoicism is an ideology, an idea that produces certain social effects, aside from the intentions of its adherents. Stoicism is an ideology because it makes it possible for us to imagine that the world is full of only 2 kinds of people, those who have their passions under control and those who don't. The people who have their passions under control are the wealthy, the successful, the powerful, and ultimately the happy. The people who do not have their passions under control are the poor, the unsuccessful, powerless, and ultimately the unhappy. Stoicism allows us to carve up the world very neatly in this way. The original Stoics were very sensitive to the possibility that a virtuous person might be wealthy one day and lose everything the next day. That possibility is part of what their philosophy was designed to address. So contemporary adherents of Stoicism might say that my complaint is missing the point of Stoicism altogether. Stoicism, they might say, is relevant to people in both fortunate and unfortunate circumstances. There is something to this response, but I don't think it goes far enough. Because of its recommendation to remain indifferent in the face of suffering, Stoicism will at best be indifferent when faced with inequality, exploitation, and injustice. At worst, Stoicism will affirm that this just is the way things inevitably must be or should be. In her book, Burdened Virtues, Lisa Tessman articulates a similar idea. She talks in the book about the stake that the dominant class in any society has in promoting the idea that their dominance is fully justified. She calls this an epistemology of ignorance, which is a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy when it comes to the acquisition and distribution of wealth. Tessman writes, the epistemology of ignorance contributes to the well-being of members of privileged groups, both because it allows them to believe themselves to be more virtuous than they are, which is important. Having an image of oneself as morally good is partly constitutive of happiness. And because it facilitates the illusion that all is well in the world, that the good life can be achieved by some, consistent with the deprivation of others. Tessman explains further, those enjoying unjust economic advantage are popularly believed to be living the good life, regardless of the moral flaws that lead them to accept, develop, or maintain their unjust position. This group could include anyone from the wealthy capitalist who exploits the labor of working people while remaining unsympathetic to the hardships of their strenuous, unsafe, or deadening working condition, to the hardworking but fulfilled and well-rewarded members of the middle or upper class who resist redistributive measures that would equalize wealth. Because Stoicism has a tendency to affirm or to be resigned in relation to the status quo, it can allow us to believe that the powerful are both happy and virtuous, as Tesman describes. It can allow us to have an epistemology of ignorance about the nature of our wealth and its distribution. But, in fact, that happiness and virtue may be superficial, and it may even be predicated on injustice and exploitation. So this is the first reason why Stoicism is the philosophy of the 1%. It tends to justify the way things are, and justifying the way things are is one of the most important tasks for those who currently have power. The second reason that Stoicism is the philosophy of the 1% is best seen by way of contrast with the words of Martin Luther King Jr., which I quoted in my last video. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The poor and powerless are those who need to hear these words of hope. The rich, however generous and charitable they may be, will not experience the need for hope with the same existential urgency as the poor. That is because the rich, while they might wish for the profound type of change that would be required to rectify the injustices in our society, do not stand to gain from that type of change. Stoicism is the philosophy of the 1%, because Stoicism tells us, quite explicitly, that there is no hope, that change is not really possible, and that the best we can do is to resign ourselves to our lot in this life, whatever it might be. I argued in my last video that the absence of this type of hope in Stoicism leads to moral absurdity. In certain situations, Stoicism leaves us like the samurai at the end of Kurosawa's film, with the sense that our moral efforts are ultimately futile. The rich can avoid confronting that type of absurdity in their experience more effectively than the poor. Unlike the poor, the rich do not inevitably confront the absurdity of their moral efforts on a daily basis. The rich have less experiential sense of the moral cost of poverty, of the sense that our moral efforts don't ultimately get us anywhere. So these are the two reasons that I think Stoicism is the philosophy of the 1%. The first reason is that because Stoicism tells us to be indifferent in the face of suffering, it can easily justify the status quo and support the idea that the way wealth is divided in our society is not really a matter of any moral consequence. The second reason that Stoicism is the philosophy of the 1% is that the wealthy can more easily avoid the moral absurdity that we all face in the absence of moral hope. Stoicism has no place for moral hope, so it's more likely to be attractive to those who do not regularly have to face situations where the universe seems entirely unresponsive to their lives on a moral level. Check out my video on Stoicism and moral absurdity if you'd like to get a better sense of what I mean. So, what is a better philosophy, one that does not seem so perfectly suited to be the ideology of the 1%? One alternative that a lot of folks on YouTube are talking about is called the law of attraction, which is the idea that it's possible to attract what you want into your life in one way or another. While Stoicism tells us to minimize our desires and to expect that our desires could be confounded at any moment, the law of attraction tells us to intensify our desires and to expect that the universe or God or whatever will bring into our lives the things we desire. Is this a better option than Stoicism? That's what I'd like to talk about next. If you'd like to continue the conversation, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, Carpe Diem.